بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. We usually try to take the 10 minutes before the beginning of the khutbah for any questions that anyone might have. Some things that we've discussed in the past include riba, how to define it. We talked about mortgages, we talked about life insurance, we talked about eating the meat of Ahl Kitab, and does that apply in the US and does it not? And there are a number of other issues that we discussed. You guys can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube page to find some of those questions, inshallah. But if anyone does have any questions that they would like to ask, then the floor is open for whoever would like to ask them. Otherwise, there are a couple things that I have been asked that I can talk about, but I like to give preference to the audience first. Yes, tfaddal.
I was prescribed medical marijuana. Is that haram?
Zain, okay. So the question is about medical marijuana. What happens is that in Islam, and there are a number of medicines that have been prescribed historically that do different things. There are some that have been categorically prohibited, and there are some that have been allowed based on the different things in the Sharia. So for example, burn victims, if any of you though are familiar, what happens is their skin actually burns away, so they have to put another layer of skin on top of that. What they've actually done is pig skin is something that is used and has been used in people in order to replace the skin that is lost. There are some scholars that have spoken about this, and some said that, oh, because it is pig skin, it is not permissible. And other scholars said, okay, because of the chemical treatment that happens to that skin, and this is a Al-Hijrah position. You know, the different scholars have different positions on how to deal with pig skin. Some of them do allow it, and they say based on that allowance, it's actually permissible to use to replace that skin that has burned away. In regards to marijuana, it's important to understand that while it is something that is impermissible, right? Any type of intoxicant is considered impermissible. And what is an intoxicant? An intoxicant is something that prevents an individual from making sound decisions, right? Not affect his decisions. Like, so some people might say, like smoking, for example. Smoking doesn't remove the ability to make a decision. It can influence the decision, but so can coffee, right? Coffee influences our decision as well. There are different things that we can intake, and there are different drugs that we intake. And by drugs, I mean in a very broad way, right? I mean in a very spectrum type of way. I don't mean like in the negative connotation of intoxicants. But because we deal with all these things, whether they be serotonin, whether it be nicotine, or whether it be caffeine, right? There are all these things that we are constantly consuming and taking in. Some of them will influence our decision, and some of them will mask our decisions completely. And from those things that mask our decisions completely are intoxicants. The main intoxicant that has been categorically prohibited is what in Islam? Alcohol, right? This is something that is agreed on, that alcohol is something that Islam has categorically prohibited. Now, if we understand that alcohol is categorically prohibited, are there other things that we can take other than alcohol in order to help us with pain, right? So there are many types of pain that we deal with. Some people have different types of surgery. Some people have different types of back pain. Some people have severe headaches. So there are medications that are prescribed for these individuals to help them deal with the pain. Why is that? Because when I'm in that state of pain, why am I allowed to use this medication? Because when I'm in that state of pain, I can't make active decisions, right? It becomes difficult for me to function. It becomes difficult for me to live my day-to-day life. So because of that, some scholars have now said, all right, well, in order to get out of that state, we have to take some medication to help that. The problem is most of those medications have either an effect where a person can become addicted to them, or they do have an effect and they mask an individual's ability to make sound decisions. So the question now comes, do I prevent myself from making sound decisions due to pain or due to this medication, right? These are the choices that we have. And most scholars will say, choose the one with the medication, because the pain is something, at least that aspect and that element can be removed. So what happens is when I'm in that state of pain, there are two things that can happen. I can take opioids, which has been the dominant and predominant medication that has been given through many pharmaceutical companies. And this has created what we now know to be the opioid epidemic. So you have that. And what is the problem with opioids is that they're extremely addictive. So they do help with the pain. And we have developed a cultural and social tolerance for these opioids, right? So we know about OxyContin, and we know about all of these different drugs that we take. And as Muslims, we don't question them. We haven't said anything. Why? Because society said this is quote unquote medication. And because it's quote unquote medicine, it's okay for us to consume them. The same thing would apply to marijuana. The same thing would apply to marijuana. And even within marijuana, there are a number of benefits that doctors will talk about, saying that, okay, well, it doesn't have the same addictive qualities. It still allows for some sense of clarity, not complete clarity, but it still allows for some sense of clarity for an individual to make decisions. So when given these two choices, when given the choice between the opioid and the marijuana, you will have a number of scholars who will say this person would be allowed to consume that marijuana because it will help with the pain. It will help with whatever issues that person is facing. It is not addictive, and he or she still has the ability to make decisions and to make sound decisions. So this is the reasoning behind why some scholars would allow that. Some scholars will not allow it altogether. They'll say, no, it is not something that is permissible because it is essentially an intoxicant. There's another layer to the marijuana as well. There are two main chemicals in marijuana, right? So you have the CBD and you have THC. THC is what is actually the intoxicant or intoxicating portion of marijuana. You have many oils that are for sale now, right? They're called CBD oils. It's important for every single one of us to look into those oils and see what the THC content is. And this is for the general person, right? This is for the general population, not the people who are medically prescribed. So is it okay for me to use CBD oil for pain? Is it okay for me to use for joints? Is it okay for me to use in other things? Yes, these things would be permissible. And someone might say, okay, well, isn't marijuana haram? Marijuana is haram the same way grapes would be haram, right? Grapes I can use to make grape juice. I can use it to consume, and it's completely permissible, it's completely reasonable. But when it comes with marijuana, the same thing applies. If there's a haram element to it, or if I can use it in a haram way, the thing that is haram is the haram use, right? The thing that is haram in that is the haram use. And if there's a halal use for it, now they use hemp can be used to make shirts. Hemp can be used to make different types of clothing. Hemp can be used in different ways. So there are halal elements that can be extracted out of that, and that is something that's completely reasonable, completely permissible. Another good example would be like pufferfish. Pufferfish has a poisonous sac in it, right? There's a poisonous sac in the fish. Is it halal to consume the poison? No, absolutely not. So Islam has a blanket prohibition on two things. It has a blanket prohibition on intoxicants, those which affect my ability to make sound decisions, and a blanket prohibition on toxicants. What are toxicants? Why can I not drink bleach? Why can I not consume poison? I can't consume any of those things because they will cause harm to my body, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam have prohibited the consumption of them. Are small amounts of those doses permissible in some instances? Yes, if there is proven medical evidence that these things actually do help. In small amounts, these things are something that are completely reasonable. So are there cases where scholars do allow the use of medical marijuana? Yes, there are cases where it is allowed, depending on the individual situation. This is not a blanket permission. Please be clear in that. This is not a blanket permission. This is for individual cases, just like the case of using opioids, like when we're talking about OxyContins and all of these other things. These are going to be case by case, and this is something that's important to get in, for us to understand. Whenever I am prescribed this by a doctor, there are a few people I need to take into confidence. One of them is my local scholar. So when I go and I make this decision that, okay, hey, this is the pathway, or this is the medical pathway I want to take, I have to speak to my doctor, and I have to speak to my imam, or I need to speak to my sheikh, or I need to speak to my local scholar. Because this person will give me medical guidance, and this person will give me spiritual guidance. And I need to make sure that I'm receiving as much guidance as I can to make the most sound decisions possible. وجزاكم الله خير. والله أعلم وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.